Okay, here we are. We're Kinesiology 230. This is chapter 4. Still talking about mechanics. This is presentation number 7 out of 7. This is specific to mechanical foundations. You may recall from the last presentation, we started off with this big list and we worked our way through these first 4. Now we're going to try to dig in and get these guys done. So let's go ahead and get going. When we look at fiber type, you have a maximal force production capability of a muscle is proportional to its cross-sectional area. So that it makes sense, the bigger the cross-sectional area, the more muscle that's there, the more force you can create. Makes sense. Now, you can kind of equalize this to be able to evaluate muscle fiber. The force of contraction per unit is referred to as specific tension. So if we look at like a little centimeter by centimeter by centimeter cube of the thigh, we can see the density of different muscle fiber types that are in that particular area and get an idea of the actual specific tension that area and the force that area can create. Now that's referred to as specific tension. Now, in general, type 2 have higher specific tension than type 1. Kind of makes sense, right? Because if you break it out, type 1 are oxidative, they have lower specific tension. Type 2B, which are the very explosive ones, those are anaerobic, they have a higher fatigue factor, and they have a higher specific tension. And we kind of explored a little bit of that when we were talking fiber types before, and it just kind of makes sense in terms of like the density. If you think of somebody who might be particularly type 1, very much aerobic oriented, where they run maybe long distance races, versus somebody who is on a track and field team who throws shot put and discus, think of the body types and the amount of muscle that each one is going to have, and their cross-sectional area of muscle is going to be different for your long distance runner than it will be for your shot putter or thrower. Just kind of just wrap yourself around that conceptually in terms of track and field events, and it just makes sense. So with the muscle, force can be increased by the firing frequency. We talked about that in terms of that summation of firing, 50% to 80%, 50% to 85%, 50 to 90%. We talked about that before. And that our motor units have this kind of orderly recruitment pattern. We've talked about that in terms of you have the low level hanging fruit, or your type 1, then it goes type 2X and type 2B. And you can increase the activation of agonists and synergists, meaning when you're doing an activity, you can call to action the other muscles that actually help make a movement happen. And you can quiet down or not send a signal to the antagonist. So when you look at this, you look at how motor units are recruited, and you look at how motor units are called upon to move weight. And what ends up happening, and when you start working with people, if they're pretty deconditioned and have not worked out in quite some time, perhaps they're people that have not been into the gym ever, when they start working out, they get stronger, but not because they're packing on tons of muscle. But what happens is they actually end up being just more coordinated. I don't mean like coordinated like dancing at the wedding, but their bodies become more coordinated in how they recruit the right muscles and the right muscle fiber, and they call to action the right motor units to make movement happen. So it becomes more of like a central nervous system and peripheral nervous system play in a motor unit conversation, as opposed to straight hypertrophy that you see in the muscle. So as a trainer or a coach, you have to be kind of cognizant of this and realize, your younger guys or your younger athletes, he or she, when they start working out, they're going to see great gains when they start off. You have to be smart to realize that muscle gets stronger, tendons get stronger, ligaments get stronger, bone gets stronger from training, and you have to be able to temper that approach and program it out correctly so you don't blow them out of the water and they try doing too much too soon, and they end up with some type of itis, an inflammation type injury, a tendonitis, a bursitis, because they're trying to do too much too soon. Same thing with your personal training people as well. They talk about this in terms of time history of activation. Maximal muscular force takes about half a second to develop. And if an activity is like a reactive to a puck coming at you when you're a goalie in hockey, that's going to take less than 0.5 seconds. That's going to be a very small fraction of 0.5 seconds. So your maximal muscular force will not be attained in the window of opportunity it takes you to contract muscles maximally. So as an athlete, you have to be able to train to be able to anticipate movement patterns, which is another conversation, but you have to be able to teach your body how to increase the rate of force development and tighten that window down so it's not 0.7 seconds, but it gets closer down to the 0.5. And so you'll see folks that when you start doing kind of like, if you will, neurological type training, eye-hand coordination, they get better and better and better, more coordinated at being able to recruit the right muscle fiber, but also be able to recruit it in an orderly fashion, but also be able to recruit it quickly. So there's a domino effect that you have here. So with rate force development, RFD, it can be improved with strength training. It can be improved through plyometric training. And when you look at plyometric training specifically to enhance the stretch shortening cycle, which is like when I was jumping on that box before, I dropped down to a quarter squat, I jumped up on that plyo box. You have this eccentric muscle action immediately followed by a concentric muscle action, and you can play around with the phasing on that, where it's down, up right away, or it's down, pause, hold for 1 second, and then you jump back up. So there's different ways you can play around with the phasing of plyometrics, but just in a real general sense for this class, realize plyometric training enhances the stretch shortening cycle, which then also helps with the rate force development to help with reaction. The book gets into moment arms and levers, and they provide this example side by side where they talk about the bicep length, depending on the length of the bicep and where it attaches will affect how the resistance feels. That will change the actual moment arm. And you can see over here, you have the distance between the elbow joint and the muscle insertion is different here than it is here. So from a leverage standpoint, that's going to change how a 30-pound dumbbell will feel between person A and person B. And realize it's not as simplistic as that. There's a little more complexity to it because you might have different fiber types, etc. But just realize the insertion of the muscle on the moment arm, or the lever arm itself matters. And it matters in terms of, remember, ARF, my dog barks far away. When we look at a bicep curl and where the pivot point is, where the muscular force is being applied, and where the resistance is, if you change this and move it further out like you see over here, it's going to make that dumbbell feel lighter. I mean, it's at the end of the day, you think about what happens when you have your bicep is attached further out on that arm. It's going to basically shorten the moment arm, meaning the difference between where the attachment is and where the resistance is. So depending where it is will affect how that feels. And then also, they're fixed, right? Your muscle attachment is fixed, and where the insertion is by the tendon is fixed, and the muscle, the fiber type is fixed. But the moment arm is going to change due to angle as you do your bicep curl. So that's going to change, in essence, how that dumbbell feels. And usually, or generally speaking, that 90 degrees of elbow flexion is where you have the longest moment arm, and that's where you're going to feel the weight the most. The book gets into strength and sticking points. They talk about strength just being the ability to exert force. I respond back and say, duh, but they elaborate a little further. They say it's more precise to say that strength is the maximal force that a muscle can generate at a specified velocity. So we haven't really talked about, that conversation other than the dynamic of the faster you move, the lower the weight, or the slower you move, the higher the weight can be. We can handle more resistance. But what they note here is the weakest point in the range of motion is referred to as the sticking point, which makes sense. You're going to have sticking points in any movement pattern that you have, whether it's a bench press coming off your chest, or it's a bicep curl, or whatever activity it may be. So you have to be able to find ways to work through those with your clients or your athletes, and even your physical therapy people as well. So the book starts to describe both open and closed chain exercises, and this can be incredibly complex, and hopefully I'm able to bundle this up for you in a way that makes sense. But open chain movements usually involve a single joint moving against some form of angular resistance where it's rotational. Closed chain movements involve multiple joints moving against a linear resistance like a bench press, a squat, or perhaps a leg press. And you'll have conversations in the gym in terms of what's closed chain and open chain, a leg press or a squat, or what. And it becomes a challenge to really sometimes get people to visually understand what we're talking about. So with this, in closed chain exercise, the distal segment, hands or feet, is or are fixed and do not move. Squat or push-up. That'd be closed chain. In open chain exercises, the distal segment moves. So there's one takeaway, right, in terms of closed versus open. And if we go ahead and look at this, closed chain exercises typically engage multiple muscle groups, simultaneously leading to greater joint stability, lunges. Open chain exercises often isolate a single muscle group and involve fewer joints, like a hamstring curl. So a single joint exercise versus a multi-joint exercise. And then closed chain exercises more closely like mimic real life and sport specific movements, which I agree with. We don't play football on a leg extension or leg curl machine, right? And so, open chain exercises are great for targeting specific areas, but we perform most of our activities in a closed chain environment, so we need to replicate that when we're training people. All right, moving on to the next one, which is the last one.